really what are the top security current concerns that I've seen in the real world with my real nonprofit clients. What are the top things you should be paying attention to? And we're going to go into some more details about those things. So let me switch that poll. So it looks like 83% of you said you don't have a particular person responsible for the security policies. So top security concerns. This is sort of the top threats that most nonprofits are going to kind of come across, right? This is based on their real world experiences, and I'm going to give you some ideas and solutions for dealing with these different things. And it's broken up into a few sections. We're going to talk about access and more about that, how you control access to things and the top things to think about where things can go wrong. We're going to talk about actual devices, physical devices, some ideas around securing those, creating policies around those, the different pitfalls. And this is a big one now, especially for nonprofits. Devices are, as sort of your personal and work life has been blended, especially now with COVID. People are at home. They may be using their home computer for work. We're going to talk about online assets too, then, meaning your website, documents, things you share online. Then we're going to talk about communications. What are some best practices for communications? Then we're going to talk about these third-party software things you may use, and then vendors and partners, what you need to think about with those. So thanks for answering the polls. It's very helpful. So it looks like no one has answered that they have all security policies clearly outlined and communicated yet. So it looks like most of you are working on it. So that's good. Definitely it's an ongoing thing you work on, right? With this stuff, it's never like you're just done and it's over. Obviously the security landscape, it evolves. So the first thing, top thing, access control and passwords and all of that. And this is huge because still with online systems, whether it's your Facebook page, your website, or your document sharing system, your donor system, whatever it is, still to this day, the number one way systems are breached by hackers is poor passwords, poor logins. Login is shared across many systems. One of the systems is compromised and then they have access to everything. Someone just has a poor password or whatever, or they've shared their password insecurely. So access control and passwords and logins is huge. So, and there could be a lot of work with restricting access. This adds extra work, right? That's probably one of the reasons why so many WordPress websites that I log into for the first time with a nonprofit client, they have like 20 users and every single user is an admin, right? Because it takes extra work to create refined access control, but it's very important. So you want to scale your access restrictions to the importance, obviously, right? To the importance of the data. So from something that, is important, but has no sensitive personal information or sensitive data, maybe you only have a couple levels of access to that. Or maybe that doesn't even have different levels. Everyone has the same access. Scaling that up to something like financial systems where you need very fine-grained tight access. So an example is I was working with a nonprofit school at one point, and this is a long time ago before, I don't even think Google existed yet. And they had this big issue with they had a remote accounting system who did not work in their office. They needed a way to move financial information from the school to their person. So it needed to be like a one-to-one access situation. This had to be highly encrypted. So what we helped them set up is a system where their email server at the campus had a special tool to encrypt email going to their remote accountant person. And that person, those emails could literally only be opened on that computer and nowhere else. There was actually a physical thumb drive that you had to plug into your computer like a key to unlock this email account, which then received this financial information. So it was a one-to-one end-to-end encryption situation, which was very secure. And I assume they don't use that anymore. Now they probably have online accounting system they use, but that was an example of an extremely tight access control situation. There's lots of ways to change the level of access to. And you want to determine the best way to control access. It may be by location, right? So say you have a very sensitive system, you may want it to only be accessed in your office. So maybe that system you can lock down by location, only computers in that physical office can use that system, right? There's no online internet connectivity. You could restrict things by device. That's a common thing. You may want to say this system can only be accessed on the official organization's computers and issued laptops and stuff, no personal things. So you want to determine the best way to do that. And like I said before, the least access needed. So on the screen here is a little picture of some kind of an advanced area of WordPress where you can control, different, there isn't just admin and editor, there's custom sort of permissions levels. And this is actually very common with what we do. The websites that we build and host, we keep very careful control over the access to the WordPress admin accounts and stuff. The vast majority of the organizations we work with, they don't even have an admin level account to their website because they don't need it. We can assign any permissions they need to a custom type of user. And then that way there's only one admin account and it's ArcStone's account. And we actually need that to control things like the automatic backups and stuff like that. So limiting permissions, limiting access will limit damage and exposure to what can happen. And some tips on this, because passwords, like I said, is a big deal. And it's very common for people to kind of use the same password for like every website and everything they use, right? Which is a terrible, terrible idea. So when it comes to access and passwords and logging into things, a top tip for sure is consider using, if you can, two-factor authentication, meaning that you need a password and then another form of login. It could be biometric based, like a thumbprint, or it could be using an authenticator tool. So there's this thing called the Google Authenticator, which is a free app you put on your phone. It's very common and popular. And so when you go to try to log into a system, it's going to actually, you're going to have to open the Google Authenticator tool and see, what the code is there and punch that in as well. And that code changes every 30 seconds. So it makes it almost impossible to use someone else's login to break into something, even if you have their password, because you won't have access to that authenticator system. So two-factor authentication using authenticator systems is a best practice. Also, some type of password tool. So like I said, you don't want to use the same password for everything. So as human beings, it's very difficult for us to remember like 50 passwords, or, having a very strong, very long password is recommended. And how do you remember that? So it's just best, and we highly recommend that you use a password management system. So we use something called OnePass. And OnePass is a great tool. It's a paid tool you use. Subscribe to it. There's like a per user per month kind of fee, and that helps you manage all your passwords. So you have this one vault with a very secure way to get into it. It's usually two-factor. OnePass does have the option to use a physical device like a thumb drive to unlock your other passwords. So you have this one system to use for all your passwords. It's very cool. There's browser plugins, so it can autofill things out. And so basically, you can make incredibly long passwords. They're impossible to crack. And every single site you use or system you use can have a unique password. So I use this. Our entire company uses it. It's very cool. And what you can do is, you can have different passwords for everything. Like my T-Mobile account and my, account to some other systems. I don't even know what the passwords are. I have no idea what they are. They're giant long strings of nonsense, but it's all managed with OnePass. So I don't have to remember it. I will say this too, you need to be very careful when you use these systems. If you're going to use an authenticator or you're going to use a password management system, they are very good and very secure. Part of them being incredibly secure is if you forget your password to it or something happens, so you lose your phone or you get a new phone, these systems will have sort of a backup thing to get into them if you lose a device or lose your password to these password systems. So just be careful. Usually it's a printout you can keep somewhere in a safe somewhere, or maybe a thumb drive, a key you download, and you keep that in a secure location. So keep that in mind. Another thing is enforce the same policies and access for passwords, enforce these throughout your whole organization. So a really simple example of how you can do this is many people, will use, many nonprofits will use the Google nonprofit program. You may use G Suite and have Gmail and Google Docs. So our whole company is run on Google. And so we use Google Drive and Google Docs for all of our information. And we have heightened security policy on that. So, I have an iPad and we have different devices. So my iPad has, a lock screen. You have to put in a code, right? You can't just open it. You have to put in a code. So that if I did not have that feature enabled on my iPad, I wouldn't be able to load on that iPad through the Google app, or Google Drive. We have additional security set on Google Drive that says all devices that are going to access that app have to have a password on the screen or something, or fingerprint. It can't just be you turn the device on and have access. So that's another thing. And, we also force long passwords with all of our Google accounts. We also force you to change the password. All of our passwords expire after a certain time. So there's all those ways if you use something like G Suite where you can enforce this security. It looks like we have a question here. I'm just going to take a quick look. Can you outline the difference between app-based two-factor and SMS-based? Okay, so this is a good question. Since we were just talking about this, I will go into this and answer this. So the question is basically saying, there's texting-based two-factor, right? So it's texting-based two-factor. Well, you try to log into your Google account, Google sends you a text message, right? And then you see the code. So that's a little different from the Authenticator app. Now, the Authenticator app, most people would consider more secure. They would consider that far more secure because it actually is possible to clone someone's SIM card, clone someone's phone number, and it is possible to see text messages that someone else is getting. Now, that's not something that just any, person is doing. I mean, you have to have a lot of technical knowledge for that, but that is possible. It is possible to spoof someone's phone. The Authenticator app is very, very difficult to break into. It is much more secure than just text-based two-factor. However, like I said, when it comes to that security, there's extra issues like if you change phones, like if you change from one Google phone or one Android phone to another phone, they move all your apps. Usually it does not move your Authenticator information. That is locked to that physical device. So in order to say have to move your Authenticator info from one device to another, you have to have both at the same time. Don't just get rid of your own phone. You have to have both, and you'll have to be able to move them through a special tool. So the Authenticator apps, I would say more secure, much more secure. You just need to be careful with them because they are locked down very tight. So thank you for that question. So the next security concern is devices. And with COVID and everyone kind of using their personal things at home and whatever, or taking their work laptop to a coffee shop or something, I mean, this is a thing that is becoming a much bigger deal, right? So, so when we talk about devices, it's really whatever your policy is. So, they have the BYOD, the bring your own device. So have a policy on devices. Like I just gave this iPad example, I have to have a password on this. But what you may want to do for your organization is say no personal iPads, no personal phones. You may want to restrict it so your donation system, can't be accessed by people's personal computers, because if they may be good in following all the security protocols for their work, right? They may be doing everything they're supposed to do at your organization, but maybe their phone or their personal things, they just don't have very good security on it. And that could be a point at, an access point at which someone could break into your things. So when it comes to devices, have a policy on bring your own device, have policies on passwords and encryption. So most laptops and devices now have encryption built in. If you have Apple stuff or you have Microsoft, Microsoft Windows, they now all have a way when you're setting up the computer to say encrypt everything on this hard drive. And I highly recommend that. Highly recommend passwords on all devices and encryption. So if it gets stolen, even if they somehow get through the password, stuff is still encrypted. Also retiring devices and getting rid of them, or say someone gets promoted, they give their laptop to someone else and they get a new one. Whenever these devices are changing hands, you need to think about security, what's on it. And if you have to retire something or wipe it out, there are special tools to delete all the data off the drive. If you're going to donate things, that's another big thing too. Sometimes large organizations will donate all their old computers to some other nonprofit. Make sure when they leave your hands, they have been sanitized. And plan for what happens if a laptop or phone breaks or if it gets stolen or anything like that. We had an Arcstone company laptop stolen out of our parking lot of our company, which unfortunately the crime in our area has gone way up with break-ins and cars and stuff. So, but nothing was lost on that. That laptop had been backed up every day because we have policies on that. And as soon as we knew it was stolen, we were able to log into the online, Apple account and remotely just delete everything on the computer. So we're able to remotely completely sanitize that computer when it was stolen. So having those types of things set up is really useful. Be very careful too where you let people bring work devices. So public Wi-Fi, even if there's a password on it, but being at sort of like a coffee shop with all these other Wi-Fi users, people you don't know, that is a very common way actually for devices to be compromised. And you can go on YouTube and see all kinds of videos on people doing this. Hackers going to a coffee shop and they'll set up their own Wi-Fi hotspot that's named what the business is named. And so they just join it. They don't even think about it. And then that person then can see all the stuff all those computers are doing, that hacker, and they can steal information. So be very wary about the networks and connectivity and where you bring devices. So I have policies on that and clear guidelines. I'm going to switch this poll here because I actually have a poll on bring your own device. So I'll launch that poll. So this is a big thing. This is a very big thing that pretty much all of you will probably be concerned about because it has to do with your website. I'm sure you all have websites. You probably all have document sharing systems like Dropbox or Google Drive or something. You have web hosting. And so your website and your online stuff, for sure, website hosting, make sure you use a very good reputable host for your website. And usually the major hosts, there's reviews out there and you can see, do a little research, but your website for sure should have SSL at the very least. And if you haven't gotten an SSL certificate recently, there's been different versions of it. So there are newer ones. So make sure you have a recent up-to-date SSL certificate. Make sure anything on your site that's incredibly important is encrypted. Use file encryption whenever possible. Whenever you're capturing data on your website, say you're capturing it through just a simple form, remember that it's not likely that data will be encrypted. So maybe you're receiving the data securely, but it's not being stored anywhere on your website, or your web host is not storing that, in an encrypted way. So we've done many systems with law firms and in healthcare and other things where they needed to capture very sensitive information. And we use other third-party systems that are designed for that. Say if you have to take healthcare information and you're dealing with HIPAA and stuff, there are actually HIPAA certified and good vendors out there for that. So you don't just throw up a simple form on your website, simple intake form. Use a system that's meant for that sensitive data. Another thing, use some kind of security tool. So for every website we host, Arcstone, we do a bunch of different things, and I'm going to go through some of those later. But say you have a WordPress site and maybe you don't host with us, you host somewhere else. Make sure you have some kind of security plugin for WordPress. If you use Drupal or something else, make sure there's an additional security plugin system there. So the screen here is showing something called WordFence. WordFence has free and paid. So at the very least, if you have a WordPress website, make sure you have WordFence installed, at least the free version. It does provide quite good access, and you'll be surprised. So even if you have kind of a small nonprofit, a small website, if you have WordFence on there, you will see daily attacks on your website, people trying to hack into it. There's these bots out there doing it. They just go through the entire web and try to basically hack every website they find. So be very critical about what you host on your website too, the information you host. And sometimes it doesn't seem that sensitive, but really anything that's like identifiable contact information, be very careful with that in your website content. So an example is we had a nonprofit client of ours. We built their website, but they manage all their own content, and they created a big long page on their website, which is like a contact directory for other vendors like them, so people could get help. And it was Very valuable. People loved this list of other organizations. It was incredibly valuable list for the website visitors. And people loved it. It was one of the most viewed pages on their website. Well, they really should not have done that. We didn't know they were doing that. They were just having a big directory, because what happened was a hacker basically took that page, stole all the contact information. It was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And then they cloned this company's website and made this other website that looked just like it. And then they emailed out that entire list asking for donations. And they actually got some people to donate because they didn't realize it wasn't the official organization doing it. So that's an example. You have to be careful. So when we redid their website later, we didn't have just a big directory. We created a system where you had to search. So just doing that, just adding one more step where you have to pick a zip code or you have to search for these other vendors, that is all that was needed to keep that list from being stolen. So be very wary about that. What you're hosting on your website, what kind of content is there? Can that content be used for some kind of nefarious purposes? So the next thing is communications. Communications meaning email or Slack or instant messaging or Facebook Messenger, any kind of thing where you're exchanging information, you're using communication tools. So if you do have to use an online communication tool for very sensitive information, whatever it may be, make sure you have end-to-end, what's called end-to-end encryption, where the sender device is encrypted. That's all encrypted. The communication is encrypted, and it ends up on the other end also encrypted. So that's called end-to-end encryption. So at the very least, too, make sure your staff is really uses email best practices, or at least aware of things like phishing or email attachments. They're with all the file sharing systems out there, there's really almost no need to ever attach anything to an email, right? I don't ever do that. When I'm sending an email, I have to send a file. There's a Google Drive link there. And that way I can use the Google system to restrict access to that file to who should have it, right? Because if you just email somebody a document, they can just hit forward and send it, wherever they want. So use email best practices. Be aware of the phishing, email scams. There's a lot of email scams out there. Be wary of forged and spoofed emails. Actually, what they call spoofing an email, sending an email and making it look like it was sent from somebody else is very, very easy to do. It's laughably trivial to do, actually. Now, if you do use a system like Gmail or a good email platform, for your email service, they will warn you. Like in this picture here, you can see it says, be careful with this message. And also in that picture is a little piece of code just showing you how little code makes up where an email is from and where it's going to. It's very little information. It's easy to kind of do email scams. So use a good email tool that's going to warn you that emails could be, suspicious. And they have clear policies, as part of your security policies about email. And I use the previous example about sort of the contact info that was stolen. A lot of times people's contact address books get stolen. You'll see that. You'll see someone received a suspicious email attachment, and they click on it because they don't think about it, and then their entire address book is stolen. And then all those people receive, a suspicious email. The next area is kind of third-party software. This is kind of a big one. This is becoming a bigger deal now. So by third-party software, we really mean anything you install on your computer. It could be a program you install on your computer to do something, or it could even just be a browser plugin, Chrome and Firefox. All these browsers have plugins, and you may see a useful plugin. Here's a plugin that, does a news feed or does something interesting, or you need to vet anything you install on your system. So before you install anything, even a browser plugin, research and see, Google the name of it. Are there security concerns with this? So there's two major types of issues when we're talking about things that are installed. So there's malware and ransomware. So malware means that you've downloaded a program to do a specific task. Maybe it's something like a bulk email tool, or maybe it's a donor database tool or something you've downloaded. So malware means that there is code in there that has a hidden nefarious feature. and they're not telling you about it. So it's a donor management tool, but it's also doing something else in the background and they're not telling you about it. Now that could be a minor annoyance to something really harmful. So on the minor annoyance end, a lot of Chrome plugins that, like, there's shopping plugins, oh, find the lowest price or whatever. There's a lot of these Chrome plugins that are actual malware. What they do is, once you have that plugin installed, say you try to Google something, it won't use Google. It uses some proprietary search engine that's all sketchy, that's full of ads and dangerous stuff. And you're like, why isn't it using Google anymore? And you can't figure it out. Some of these Chrome plugins have even been so bad that you can't uninstall them. It looks like it's uninstalled, but it's not. And then you try to do a Google search or something, and it pushes you to this other sketchy website. So anything you install, research it first. So that's the kind of mildly annoying thing, and they can be up to really harmful, where there's just can steal any data on your computer. So that's malware. Ransomware is a special kind of software. Ransomware is the same idea. You're downloading something to do a task, but there's a hidden feature. The hidden feature of ransomware is usually it will basically lock your device, your entire computer, something behind a password that you don't know, or it will encrypt all the data on your computer and basically hold it hostage, right? And so then you'll see a message that says, oh, if you want your device unlocked or you want your data back, you have to pay us X amount of money in Bitcoin or something. And it'll give you instructions on how to, like, pay this ransom, right? So that's actually becoming more and more important. So keep an eye out for that. Always research anything you're going to install or use. And when it comes to ransomware, have a plan for that. You can Google it and find all kinds of nonprofits and cities and municipalities in the news that have gotten hit by ransomware. The general, so you can go Google this. Is a big subject. The general guidelines is don't ever pay ransoms. It's actually, in many places, depending upon where you're incorporated, it may not even be legal to pay a ransom. It may be against the law. And the statistics change year to year, but usually of organizations that have paid the ransom, they only get their data back about 40% of the time. So even if you pay a ransom, it's not a sure thing that you're going to get your data back. So in general, be very wary about third-party software, especially malware and ransomware. So with this poll, it looks like 100% answered that employees do use personal devices for work. So hopefully some of that guidance on devices will be helpful. And I'm be realistic about it. It's just the world we live in. There is this blending of work and personal stuff, but if you're going to have people use their personal devices, put the strongest security policies you can in place, around them. So the next section I'm going to talk about is kind of vendors and partners. I'm going to switch the poll. I actually have a poll on that too. This will be the last poll. So, you probably have a lot of vendors. I'm sure you at least have sort of, website host, and you have different vendors you work with, probably have a donation platform or maybe a CRM or an email platform. So review all of the policies of your vendors, review the terms of service, check online for reviews, see if there's been any breaches. Have there been this donation platform, have they had any big breaches in their platform in the news? Just do a little bit of research on that at the very least. And definitely vet your vendors. Look at things like their terms of reviews, terms of service. So here's some common red flags on vendors. Let's say you're using a donation system, you forget your password and you call them and they tell you what your password is. That is a horrible, giant, massive red flag. That means that your login information is not encrypted strong enough. So there's different types of encryption. And the one type that should be used for all logins is called a hash. It's basically one way. It's a one-way encryption. So you take in data and encrypt it, but you can't unencrypt it. So how that is still able to work for passwords is you type in a password, the system encrypts it and compares it against what is stored, that encrypted value. And if the values don't match, they know your login isn't good. But you should not be able to unencrypt it the other way. So for instance, with WordPress, if we built your website and you lose your password and you call us, all we have to tell you to do is you need to reset it. Like, we can't tell you what your password is. you're going to have to reset it. Another red flag is like no written policies at all. There's no mention of security. There's no policies. If you ask, how is my data encrypted, they can't tell you. That's a big red flag. Insecure communications, if they're willing to just willy-nilly reset a access through an email without verifying who you are, something like that is a big issue. So just insecure communications. I'll give you some examples of what, like, the most common thing for your vendor is really going to be your website host, right? I'm sure you all have website hosts. So I'll just give you an idea of what they should be doing. This is what Arcstone does specifically, is we use a password system like I described earlier, that 1Pass system. We have a password system. If we have to share a password with someone, we use that system, so it's secure. There's an option, for instance, to share a login, but they can only use it once. So things like that. We also use hash-based, passwords, and all logins and everything is encrypted. We use something called source code control. So even the code and the design and the elements on your website is stored in a secure system. And all our programmers, anyone who has to make an update to your website's code, all uses that secure source code control system. So we can see anytime any change is made. We utilize intrusion detection systems. So if code or anything is changed on your website outside of the normal process, we are immediately alerted, so we know it happened. We also have daily backups, and we periodically test restoring. So the backups is super, super important. Let's say your website is attacked by ransomware and it has a big message that says, we own your website now, you have to pay us to unlock it. Well, we just delete the whole thing and restore from the previous day's backup. So at most you lose 20 hours of information or something. So, and we use CMS security tools. So every single WordPress site, we have, it has the latest version of WordPress, latest version of the plugins. We scan for plugins that have issues. We get alerted if, a particular plugin has an issue, and we enforce strong passwords. And of course, we have the word fence system. So all those systems in place, those are just examples. That is what your vendor for your website should be doing.